episode of Brian Build 360. I have had one of the most difficult times I've ever had diagnosing issues with a truck, on this truck in particular. And I'm about to get ready to show you how to put injectors in this SOP, because it has just had strange, unique codes for oil pressure, the high pressure system with the ICP and the IPR, and everything checks out. I've graphed it with a meter and an expensive snap-on scanner, right? So it all graphs out, and I have 3 injectors that the oil's not flowing through. So what's happening is it's building a spike. They're still firing, and but I have weird, I don't have misfires. Everything buzz tests okay. So electronically we're good. But we're not getting fuel to some of the cylinders. So I heat gun the cylinders, and 3 cylinders aren't making heat. But then when you start to drive and the pressure builds up with the oil, they fire. So it's very bizarre. When it's cold, it won't start. It will have to be plugged in for about 45 minutes of the block heater, and then it'll fire right up instantly. So I'm thinking when these injectors are cold, they're getting stuck. They don't want to fire. As soon as they warm up a little bit, then they fire off and the truck starts up, and then it builds pressure and it fires the injectors when it's warm. Very bizarre. All good oil, all motor craft filter there. So we'll show you some more soon. Listen to it. Sounds amazing. It's running. I haven't even done the injectors yet. This is where I'm scratching my head trying to figure out what the heck is going on with the damn thing. So one of the old-fashioned ways, well, this isn't old-fashioned, it's more of a new old-fashioned way. You want to check to see if your injectors are firing. You check each cylinder with what temperature it is at the exhaust port. So we get underneath here, right? And this has a laser, so you point it at that. You get the reading there. You go to your next cylinder, close. You go to the next cylinder up in there, and then you go to your next. We're going to D8, so it's 1 on each side. Looking for is consistency. Yes, if you get to thicker castings and the manifolds, you might find there is some heat retention. Now, with this truck, what's happening is on my passenger side, when it first starts this up, they'll all stay stone cold up until you get a good driving. All but one. Right? So hit that one. 198. 216. Go to the back cylinder. 220. So the big thing we're looking for here is consistency in the temperatures. Now when it's cold, this passenger side, only one of them will get warm, and then the other 3 won't warm up. So the crazy thing with this that's driving me nuts, I hook up a scanner to it, you do an injector buzz test, everything tests out perfect. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all sound the same, all in line. You go for a drive and you graph it. Your oil pressure, the high pressure oil pump, everything's staying consistent and fine. You push the clutch in on decel, then the thing just boom, decelerates, the engine shuts off, and it stalls, and then it's a long crank to try and get it running again. Okay, so what I finally did, and there's another test. So with the injector buzz test, you can tell that the solenoids are working properly. We can tell we have oil pressure to the injectors. This is a Huey system, so it uses a high pressure hydraulic oil, high pressure pump that puts pressure behind the poppets inside of the injector, and then it uses an electric solenoid to push the pressure to fire the fuel through the injector. So if I have oil pressure and I have power to them, they should work properly. When the oil fires the injectors, it's supposed to pass through the injector and flow out. So electronically on a scanner, everything's checking out okay, except I'm getting a code that comes on when I'm driving where the oil is out of range, the pressure is out of range, okay? It's a weird code, I think P12111, and it's not very, it's difficult to understand. It could be so many things, even though it's one code, right? And it could lead you to one thing, but we're dealing with a whole high pressure oil system that these little variables can throw it off and screw it up. It wasn't until later that I took the valve cover off on the passenger side, started the engine, and noticed that 3 injectors, the oil wasn't flowing through the spouts. Those were just coincidentally, those are the 3 cylinders that don't have the temperature buildup. And so what my diagnosis here, and leave a comment if you think I'm full of it. These injectors, they still have hydraulic pressure to fire the injector, but it's not flowing the oil through. So what's happening is it's getting air in there when you shut it down, and the air in there isn't allowing these injectors to fire when it's cold. So the next weird thing I do is this won't start when it's 55 degrees out. I plug it in for 45 minutes, it'll fire up. It leads you to all sorts of things like, well, how's the compression? Well, we checked that the compression's good on the engine. Even though there's 273,000 miles on it, 400,000 kilometers, it's still running beautifully. And once it gets up to operating temperature, I don't have a misfire while I'm driving. I don't have anything that's running rough. A little bit at idle if you can really sensitive with it and can feel that stuff. So I've decided, I'm given the miles on it and they're all the original injectors, I'm just going to swap out all 8 because it's driving me bananas, and knowing that 3 aren't flowing oil through them, that just is a telltale sign that they're bad anyway. You could replace 3, it's high mileage, I gotta go on a long road trip, I don't want to get screwed. I'm gonna replace them all. So have a look. First things first, I'm gonna drain my coolant. While we're waiting for that, we're gonna start to take the intake pipe off of the passenger side. Okay, another thing we're gonna have to do here is set up your pan. It's scary that I know where it has to be. We gotta drain out our fuel from the fuel bowl. So while that's draining, I'm gonna take off the intake pipe, which requires taking off the hose for the map sensor. I've found to take the map sensor out of here, these 3 bolts off, nuts, and then I'm gonna have to move the heater hoses as well. I like to take this one off, swing it over to the side. The other one can stay connected and you have enough room to swing it over here. Then I actually use this bracket to hold those back from getting in the way of the valve cover. All right, the current time is 1:40 and I'm starting that right now. Got the map sensor unhooked from the intake down there, right? I've got those bolts out. The coolant's down enough to where I've unhooked this hose. So I'm gonna take this out, the intercooler pipe out now. 7/16 deep, always good to take off of the solid side if you can. That way you don't crush this when you put the clamp back on. Okay, intercooler pipes out. Now I'm gonna pull the heater hoses out of these little clamps that hold them in. All right, I'm gonna move that up there real quick. Okay, here's what I like to do. I swing these back there, behind that, so they're not in the way. And then I put, sorry, I've got 2 hands. And then I put this back on, upside down, to hold those hoses. And I put one of the nuts back on there. And that stops them from trying to go back to where they want to go. Okay, now we're gonna get the valve cover off. To take the valve cover off, we gotta take out a bunch of bolts. Some are studs. You've got a dipstick right here that's held down by a stud. You can see it's clean, I've been in there before. So I take that nut off, then this dipstick holder will come off. That will help you get to the next one. But then you take each one out
13 millimeter. I like to use this. You definitely need this on the driver's side. And I like to use, it's up here. When you can, we'll try to get a straight socket on there as much as you can. And then I also have swivel sockets that help a bunch with this as well. 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter, whichever you please. They're very damn close. Okay, we are at 2 o'clock here. All the bolts are out of the valve cover, so it took 20 minutes. All right. Common misconception, people think you need to take the air compressor out to get to the valve cover. No, it does take a little finagling, but you can wiggle it enough up towards the turbo and then tilt it back to come into here to where, yeah, see, you don't need to take out the compressor.
You can see the oil comes out of those spouts. There. Now each one should have that.
Now you got your valve cover off. We do have to unhook our valve cover harness. So I'm going to unplug all of the injectors, all of the glow plugs, pull them out and unplug that and take the harness out. And once we do that, then we have these little drain plugs on each bank. One's right here. And then there's another one on the back, and that's the high pressure oil system. We need to drain that out before we take the injectors out. Otherwise, all the oil from the high pressure oil system will drain down into the cylinders. And that's just not good. Okay, we've unplugged everything, took the valve cover harness out. When you have that out, always good to check inside of here for corrosion or any black burn marks from any of the connections, because if those are burned or a bad connection, that can cause misfire. All right, so now we're gonna get ourselves 1/8 inch Allen socket. I use locking extensions. If you don't have them, you should get them. Some people love them, some people hate them. It stops me from dropping tools in an engine. I love it. So we're gonna get inside of that little Allen there, make sure you got good connection. Now we're gonna break that loose. Sorry for the zoom issues. You've got that one there, and then we've got that one back yonder there. Whoop. All right, we open those up and that drains the high pressure oil system. Another thing to note here is that plug does have an O-ring on it, so you do want to either inspect or replace that O-ring, as it is part of the hydraulic high pressure oil system. So if that O-ring's bad and there's a leak, it can cause the injectors not to fire as well and mess up the pressure in that system. Okay, so this is what our new injector, remanufactured new, looks like. So the injector has a hold down bracket. That's this big metal bracket that's jingling right here. So on one side you have a spout, and on the other side you have a 10 millimeter or 8 millimeter bolt that holds it down. The spout has a 6 millimeter. Let me set that down carefully. Handle them very carefully. So we have a 5 millimeter Allen socket here we need to take out to get that spout out, and then we have that 8 millimeter bolt down below, head and that hold down that runs through that hold down nut we need to take out as well. Okay, so we just took all the spouts out. I like to keep everything in order from where they came from. Even though it's new injectors, I'm still do that stuff. So now it's time to take the 8 millimeter head bolt out from each. I'm going to do each cylinder and we should be ready. It's still draining down, you know, the oil out of the heads and the fuel. I give it a little extra time, right? So we'll take these 8 millimeter bolts out of each injector and start pulling these suckers. So when you get that bolt out, there is another bolt in the back. You don't have to take that one out. It's just an anchor for these hold downs. So hopefully, sometimes they come out easy, sometimes they're a pain. You just get under there. Good to have a little pry bar, but these have been out not too long ago. Ask me why. And then you just pop them up from underneath there. You got to push up on that hold down. Look at that. See, these are new O-rings on there. I just did them, but these are not properly functioning injectors. So okay, so we just exactly hit the hour mark. I got all 4 on the passenger side out within an hour. 1, 2, 3. These 3, they weren't working. They buzz test fine. They have new O-rings that I just did because before I changed the O-rings, I did a buzz test on everything just to see, hey, well, let me check the injectors. Maybe I don't need to replace them and I can get away with the O-rings if I'm pulling it apart anyway. Okay, now that we've got the injectors out, you might think, okay, it's time to put the new ones in and do it. I'm not ready yet. So we got to pull. What happens is all this oil and fuel now just drip down into the injector hole and into the cylinder of the engine. So now we're gonna pull the glow plugs out of each cylinder. Okay, so we're gonna pull our glow plugs out. So 10mm deep socket and a 1/4 inch extension. Again, I use locking extensions for this reason. That way nothing will fall down in there. So you wanna get down in there. I had these glow plugs out a couple weeks ago. So I'm gonna take each one out. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. Okay, so we are an hour and 10 minutes in. I've got my passenger side glow plugs and injectors out. I've got my new injectors lined up on the bench here. And since the glow plugs are out now, I'm ready to put the new injectors in. I will not put the glow plugs in yet because I know my 3 bad injectors are on the passenger side and I want to fire it up, but I made the decision to just replace all 8 injectors. So I'm not going to put the glow plugs in yet because we have to bleed out anything that's drained down into the cylinders. So I leave the glow plugs out and I got to go do the passenger side. I don't know why I'm leaning over. I might as well just stand up straight for you. And then I can do the driver's side injectors, leave those glow plugs out. And then I have to crank the engine with the glow plugs out to get whatever fell into the cylinder. Because if you crank it, diesel engines run on high compression and the pistons get really close to the cylinder head. So if you crank it with oil in there, you can actually crack the piston or hydro lock the engine, which then you need to take the glow plugs out either way. Or you can bend a connecting rod. And when you do that, it's just no coming back at that point, and then the engine has to come out. So we take the little extra time and the little extra steps. We don't cut corners with a project like this, and we bleed this all out. So I wanted to put it together. I wanted to do just 4 injectors, but I have to do the right thing and do all 8 of them so I can have peace of mind and know that everything has been done under the hood properly, and that I have all that are operating at the same function since they're all new. Okay, even though these are brand new, right, or remanufactured, I'm going to inspect them. I'm going to check these O-rings, make sure they're not rolled over, turned around. I want to make sure they're in there properly. They're not cut or nicked. They don't have any problems. You know, we got to make sure that copper washer's on there before it goes in, and obviously got to take this rubber tip off. But it's just a good practice to inspect everything before you put it together, because this is a big job to get to this point. On these injectors, you'll have a metal spacer, and then you'll have a square cut O-ring that's a spacer as well. Kind of stuffs this round O-ring in there too. So we're just checking all of these, make sure they're not rolled over, twisted, or in there improperly, because that can cause a leak. So what happens inside the cylinder head is you have that high pressure oil system that flows in between these 2 O-rings. So that high oil pressure comes in here and it puts a downward force basically onto this injector. So when this solenoid operates and it says electricity to this, it sends the hydraulic pressure into here. Now in between these 2 O-rings, you have the diesel fuel that flows in here, and that goes into these holes, and that's where the fuel goes. So you get that high pressure oil that punches that and sprays it through the nozzle tip of the injector. From here down into this copper washer, you actually have an injector cup, and around that injector cup is the coolant in the cylinder head that helps keep the tip of the injector cool. So what I'm thinking happened with these ones is we had an issue where these overheated and the oil inside of there actually got gummy and is sticking, so it cannot properly function, these injectors. Although I might be working at a low capacity, they're not working at the way they should be. All right, so now we're gonna put these injectors in. When you get your injector in there, don't cut corners. Make sure you torque each one down. Use a torque wrench with that hold down bolt. It is 10 foot-pounds. That's very important. Let's see. Okay, we've got all of our injectors in, and we've torqued down each hold down bolt to 10 foot-pounds. Yes, I realize these are all different. This was all I could find in a pinch right now for injectors to get these going. Next thing we're going to do is put those little injector spouts back in. Each one, they go in there, and these get torqued down to 9 foot-pounds. Okay, our injectors are in, the deflector spouts are back in and torqued down to 9 foot-pounds, and now we're going to put our plugs back in the high pressure reservoir there. Okay, injectors are in, spouts are in, reservoir plugs are in. I'm going to put the valve cover back on here for now. The glow plugs are still out, and then I'm going to go get started on the other side. Same deal. We got to get some stuff out of the way to get in there. I will start by taking this out. The other one, there's a bracket that's held down to the valve cover we need to get out. And then we need to take out the intercooler pipe from here. Same thing, 7.6Ts removed from the component side. You got the other side down here. Once this is out of here, this comes out pretty easy, and then we're gonna have to take the line from the wastegate out of the intake there, and out of there I remove that pipe as well. And then once I get this stuff out of the way, we'll show you where we're at. Okay, so we got those tubes out of the way right now. Another good thing to check while you're in here, this is a really common problem on these engines, is this part of the harness rubs against the valve cover while you're driving and running, and over the years they wear out and actually wires can rub through. Again, I've been in here before, I've already checked it, but look into that. That can cause a lot of wacky issues with performance and running, injectors, misfires, and all sorts of things. So really good to check that once you get out. So part of this whole project of getting the valve cover off is we got to take that bolt out and unplug this harness, and then remove this bracket here from the valve cover that holds the harness. Okay, you've got 2 bolts on the driver's side that are kind of a pain in the butt to get to. One of them, quick solution, don't take those Phillips head screws out of that crankcase breather. Just get yourself a box wrench, 1/2 inch, go down in there behind that, crack it loose. That's your best way. You don't want to remove this. You got an O-ring under there that can go bad, and it's just not fun. Now, the bolt back there, you got one down in there. Here's my weapon of choice. I've got a 13mm socket on a swivel, on a 1/4 inch locking extension. That's, what is this, a 6-inch or 8-inch extension? And I'm able to go in there with my ratchet and break that loose and then turn it out. But that's going to be one of those things that might get you frustrated. Don't get frustrated. I tell you to be patient. Don't be patient. Just know that you're going to get it out. You're going to do this. You got this. Okay, we've got all that out. Now it's time to take out our undercover valve harness. Okay, something very important on the later years 7.3. 7 injectors are what called the AD model, and then the 8th injector, which is the rear on the driver's side, all the way back there, is an AE. This was done later on. It helps improve the smoothness of how the engine runs and idles. So keep that in mind. It's very important that you replace that same cylinder with that proper injector. Okay, so we've removed all the spouts. We've got the drain plug out. Unfortunately, this drain plug on the high pressure system was stripped. It's stuck, it's tight. I'm leaving it. Looks like We've got all of the hold down bolts out for each injector, so we're ready to start pulling each one of these out as well. When you remove all the injectors, make sure that copper washer comes out with every single one of them. You don't want to leave that down in there. You don't want to do double washer. It could mess up the spacing, the O-rings, and create issues. So I just found in one of the cylinder holes there's some dried up old O-ring material, so I used my little shop vac here and stuck that down in the injector hole and cleaned that out of there. Okay, so it is currently 5:10 p.m. We've got all the new injectors in. Again, I know I don't like that they all don't look the same. It's kind of weird, but that's what happens sometimes, especially when you're in a pinch. So we've got the oil plug back in the high pressure reservoir. I've got the glow plugs out still. So I'm going to set the valve cover back on here. And what we're going to do now is, I don't have the harnesses in. I don't have anything in there. The glow plugs are still out. I'm going to go crank the engine. And what's going to happen now is, because the glow plugs are out, it's going to let all the oil and fuel that fell down into the cylinder to spray out of the glow plug hole and bleed the cylinders of that. Before we go and crank, you want to make sure we've got no rags in your turbo or your intake or anything loose that could get picked up, sucked in to there. Okay. So I'm going to crank this now, and it's going to turn over quickly because there's no compression, because the glow plugs are out of this, but it's going to get that oil and fuel that's down in the cylinders out of there so we don't do any damage or hydrolock the engine. Again, you could crack the piston, you could bend a rod, you could damage the tip of the injector. It's not a pretty thing to do, so you got to make sure you do this. Also, it helps while we're doing this to do this and let the engine crank, because then it lets, one of the more difficult things to do is to bleed the high pressure oil system, and it's still going to take 100 miles of driving after this to really get all the air out of the system. So with this out, it's nice to let this crank and turn over to allow the oil to flow through the high pressure system. So this way I'll give you, you'll hear what it sounds like. So you hear nothing, because that's just the engine starter full spin. Okay. I'll let the starter cool down. That's enough. And you can see how much is sprayed out into the valve cover during that process. So we're ready now to put the, don't mind a little smoke that came out of it, perfectly normal. Now we're ready to put the glow plugs back in. We're gonna torque each glow plug down to 14 foot-pounds. Click, click, good. All right, so it is 6:02. I just got the driver's side valve cover back up and the wire harness hooked up. So what I'm gonna try and do right now is I'm gonna crank it, start it real quick. Still haven't put the coolant back in. Not gonna run it for long. Little tip. Careful when you put the passenger side valve cover back on. I have, ask me how I know. Putting this valve cover back on, I've hit the clip for the injector, knocked it off. They are light. And then I had a little misfire. Okay, so we started right around 140 draining the coolant, and now we're about to put the coolant back in, and it is 6:40. So this took me 5 hours, which isn't too bad. So we've got all the intercooler pipes in, torqued down the clamps. We've got the intake back in, torqued down and everything. I'm going to fire it up, put the coolant in, let that bleed out, and hopefully let some air bleed out of the high pressure oil system. And then we can go out for a test drive. By the way, we did change the oil as well, because we do not want any of that diesel that came out of the injectors and out of the glow plug holes back in there. That can do damage to the internal components, so make sure you change your oil before you get this back on. About 7:06 now, getting ready to go on a test drive. Coolant's filled back up. I did not mention earlier, I have a mod where I got rid of the high pressure hoses and put hydraulic lines from the high pressure pump to each bank. And then there's also a crossover tube from bank to bank. That makes these run a lot smoother. I still think it's going to smooth out after I go for a drive as well. So I'm going to head out on the road now.
Wow, what a difference. Hey, don't be surprised when white smoke comes out of the tailpipe at first startup. That's normal. We did crank it, get a lot of it bled out of through the glow plug holes, but there's still going to be some oily residue in there, and it's going to make a smoke like oil and everything. It's going to be perfectly normal for a little bit. Also, you'll probably get some oil on your exhaust manifolds. Do your best to wipe that off. I got on my exhaust manifold when I showed you how the injector spurted, got on the up pipes. So it was a little smoky, some smoke got into the cab here, but I can feel it. I've only done about 6 miles. It definitely needs to bleed out. There's air inside of that high pressure oil system, and it makes it not as responsive at first, and it feels like a misfire or bumpy, but it will bleed out. Trust me on that. If after a while you still see smoke coming out of your tailpipe, you definitely got to get back in there. One of your O-rings might have bypassed where the high pressure oil is going into the diesel and then running through the injector and coming out the tailpipe. If that's happening after 50 miles, you're definitely going to have to pull those injectors back out and figure out which cylinder that's happening from. But other than that, I'm going to keep driving, hopefully get 100 miles on it here this evening. I don't know, it's getting late. I'm old and cranky when I get tired, so we'll see what happens. I'll let you know. All right, so it is 40 degrees out, right? Any Powerstroke should start in this weather. These things used to start when it was 10 degrees out in the Northeast, so I'm concerned when it wouldn't start at 55. We did the injectors yesterday, a moment of truth. Well, hello fans. We are about 500 miles in since we did the injector swap, on our way to Texas right now via California. But everything is running so much smoother, so much better. The starting issues have gone away. I hope I brought you a good video here of doing an injector swap. Feel free to comment, like and subscribe. Appreciate it. Share the video with friends on forums and everything. I'm all about that. Leave feedback too, or things that could do better, or maybe edit the video and add other stuff to it. I'd love all the feedback I can get so we can all be in this together and make some good videos that help everybody through their issues with the cars and trucks and diesels and gasolines and farm equipment and all that fun stuff. Thank you again. See ya.